You see it the moment you walk into that brokerage lot. A row of cruising sailboats, sun-faded, rust weeping down the topsides, prices that seem too good to be true. And the same boat has been sitting there for 11 months. Here is what I found. A dealer's unsold stock is not bad luck. It is a confession. Those boats are sitting because the smart money already opened the bilge, read the survey, and walked away. I know because I have stood on those docks and watched it happen. Before this is over, I will show you the exact production years and the one named yard where the rot was built right into the deck. Stay with me, because by the end, you will read a stale listing like a case file. Let me start with the thing nobody at the brokerage wants to say out loud. A boat that will not sell is telling you something. The market is thousands of buyers, and every one of them has eyes. When a vessel sits for a year, it means dozens of people looked, and dozens of people said no. You are not the first person to consider that hull. You might be the 40th, and the 39 before you had a reason to leave. I remember a Morgantown Island 41 sitting on stands in a yard near Fort Myers. It had been for sale for 19 months. The broker told me the owner was just being patient. That was the lie. When I crawled under it, the keel smile was open wide enough to slide a credit card into, and the rudder had a soft spot the size of a dinner plate. Patient had nothing to do with it. Every surveyor who touched that boat wrote the same thing, and every buyer ran. So the question becomes, why does a dealer keep a boat that clearly nobody wants? Why not drop the price and move it? Therefore, we have to understand how these lots actually make money, because it is not the way you think. Most people assume a brokerage buys boats low and sells them high, like a car dealer. That is almost never true in the sailing world. The vast majority of these boats are on consignment. The broker does not own them. He is holding another man's problem, taking a commission of 10% when and if it sells. That changes everything about how the lot behaves. Think about what that means. If the broker does not own the boat, he has almost no incentive to be honest about why it will not move. His money is in the listing, not the vessel. He will let a boat rot on the hard for 2 years because it costs him nothing but a spot in the yard, and the seller is the one bleeding storage fees. I have seen owners paying $400 to $600 a month in dry storage on a boat that has not had a serious offer since the pandemic. And here is the part that should make you sit up. That desperation, that slow financial bleed on the owner, is the exact thing that eventually creates the deal you get excited about. The price finally drops, not because the boat got better, because the owner got tired of paying to store a mistake. You are not being handed a bargain. You are being handed the far end of somebody else's denial. But the stale listing is only the surface. The real evidence is in why these particular boats fail to sell, and that comes down to 3 killers that surveyors find over and over. Let me walk you through the first one, because it lives inside the hull itself, and you cannot see it from the dock. The first killer is osmotic blistering, and it defined an entire era of production sailboats. In the 1970s and into the early 1980s, builders were laying up fiberglass hulls with polyester resins that were never fully waterproof. Water molecules pushed through the gel coat over years, reached the laminate, and reacted with unbonded chemicals inside. The result is a hull peppered with blisters, some the size of a coin, some the size of your fist, weeping a sour, vinegary fluid when you pop them. Now, a few blisters are cosmetic, that is what the broker will tell you. But when a surveyor finds a hull that is saturated, the fix is not a weekend of grinding. The proper repair is a full peel. A yard puts the boat on stands, and a technician runs a peeling tool across the entire underwater surface, stripping the gel coat and the wet layer of laminate right off. Then the hull has to dry for weeks, sometimes months, monitored with a moisture meter. Then it gets relaminated with epoxy and a barrier coat. I pulled the numbers from several yards on the Atlantic and Gulf coasts. A full hull peel and reglass on a 35 to 40-foot boat runs between $12,000 and $25,000. On a heavier 40-plus footer with a deep bilge, I have seen quotes cross $30,000. That is not a repair. That is the price of a decent used truck, spent below the waterline where no guest will ever see it. So picture the seller. He bought that boat for $60,000, and now the survey says it needs a $20,000 hull job before it can safely cross an ocean. He cannot drop his price by $20,000 because then he is underwater on his own dream. So he holds, and he holds, and the boat sits on the lot, blistering quietly on its stands, while the broker tells the next hopeful buyer it is just a little gel coat blistering, very common, nothing to worry about. Here is how you protect yourself, and it costs you almost nothing. When you look at any fiberglass sailboat built before 1990, ask one question first. Has the hull ever had a barrier coat applied? And when? Get the yard invoice. If they cannot produce paperwork, assume the hull is original and budget accordingly. Then, before you ever pay for a survey, run your own hand along the bottom below the waterline when the boat is hauled. Blisters feel like small bumps under old paint. If your palm reads Braille down there, you have found your answer, and you have found the reason that boat is still for sale. That handles what is hidden under the water. But the second killer is above the waterline, right under your feet, and it has ended more cruising dreams than any storm. The second killer is the cord deck, and it is the single most misunderstood defect in the used market. Almost every production cruiser built from the 1970s onward uses a sandwich construction for the deck and cabin top. Two thin skins of fiberglass with a core in between, usually end-grain balsa wood, sometimes plywood. That sandwich makes the deck stiff and light without being heavy or expensive. And it works beautifully right up until water gets in. Water gets in through every fitting that penetrates the deck. Stanchion bases, cleats, handrails, chain plates. The old bedding compound dries out, cracks, and a slow drip finds its way into the balsa. Balsa is wood. Wet wood rots. Once it rots, the core turns to a black, soggy mush. The two fiberglass skins stop working as one piece, and the deck starts to flex under your weight like a trampoline. Here is the number that stops people cold. Recoring a deck is one of the most labor-intensive jobs in all of boat repair. A yard has to cut open the top skin, dig out every bit of wet balsa by hand, dry the cavity, bed in new core material, and relaminate and fair the skin back to a smooth finish. Then it all has to be painted, because you will never match old gel coat. Labor alone on a full deck recore routinely runs from $15,000 to over $40,000, depending on how much area is involved and how good you want it to look. Partial jobs on just the side decks still start around $8,000. I stood on a Hunter from the mid-1980s once, where the previous owner had fixed a soft spot himself by drilling holes and pouring in epoxy. The deck around the mast base compressed a full quarter-inch when I stepped on it. That boat had been on the market for over a year, priced like a bargain, and it was radioactive. Every knowledgeable buyer felt that flex within 30 seconds of stepping aboard and quietly climbed back down the ladder. You can find this yourself, and you do not need a single tool. Walk the entire deck slowly, heel to toe, putting your full weight on each step, especially around the mast, the chain plates, the stanchions, and the corners of the cabin top. A sound deck feels like a sidewalk. A rotten one feels spongy, or it gives a dull thud instead of a sharp knock when you rap it with your knuckles. Bring a coin, tap along the deck. Solid areas ring. Wet core goes flat and dead. That dead sound is the sound of $40,000. That instinct that made you click this is the same instinct that will keep you off the wrong boat. And if you want to go even deeper into how this system works, I want to tell you about something I put together for exactly that purpose. I have written 3 books, True Cost, Deep Water, and Cast Off, that take everything I know about reading brokerage lots, decoding production histories, and protecting your savings, and lay it out in the kind of detail a single video cannot hold. These are not lifestyle books about sailing sunsets. They are forensic guides written for the buyer who wants to do the homework the marketing hopes you skip. If any of what you have heard today has sharpened the way you look at a listing, those books will sharpen it further. You can find them linked. Now, With that in your back pocket, let me bring you back to the third killer, because this one is the most dangerous. It is the one that can actually kill you at sea. The third killer is the standing rigging and the chain plates that anchor it. The standing rigging is the web of steel wire that holds your mast up. The chain plates are the metal straps, usually bolted through the hull or deck, that the rigging attaches to. Together they carry every ounce of load when the wind fills your sails. And together they are on a clock that most buyers never even know is ticking. Here is the testimony that matters. Insurance underwriters and riggers widely treat standing rigging as having a service life of roughly 10 to 15 years, or somewhere around 40,000 nautical miles, whichever comes first. After that, the stainless steel wire and its fittings develop invisible fatigue cracks, especially at the swage terminals where the wire meets the fitting. It can look perfect and still be one hard gust from letting go. When a shroud fails at sea, the mast comes down. That is a dismasting, and it can happen in seconds. Now here is what nobody tells the first-time buyer. Many insurance companies will not write a policy, or will refuse an offshore endorsement on a boat whose rigging is older than 15 years without proof of replacement or a full rig inspection. So you buy the boat, you go to insure it, and you discover you have inherited a bill you never saw coming. What does that bill look like? A complete re-rig. All new wire, new terminals, new turnbuckles, and often new chain plates on a 35 to 40-foot cruiser runs between $8,000 and $18,000, depending on the rig and whether the mast has to come out. Pulling and restepping the mast alone is $1,000 to $2,000 each way. And if the chain plates are the original stainless from the 1980s, hidden behind the interior liner where salt water has been quietly attacking them for decades, you may be reglassing and rebedding the deck just to reach them. I traced a listing on a beautiful center cockpit ketch that had been for sale for over a year, priced to move. The rigging tag showed the last replacement was in 1999. Do the math. That wire was more than 2 decades old. The seller wanted top dollar, but every buyer who did the homework knew they were looking at a $15,000 rig job the moment the sale closed. So the boat sat, and the seller cursed the market. When the market was simply doing arithmetic, he refused to do. Here is your protection. Ask for the rigging replacement date in writing, and ask for the invoice. No invoice means assume it is original. Then look at the swage fittings at the base of each stay with a magnifying glass. Hairline cracks, rust weeping, or a fitting bent even slightly means the whole rig is suspect. And inside the cabin, look wherever the chain plates disappear into the structure. Brown streaks, rust stains, or crazing in the fiberglass are the fingerprints of a chain plate rotting where you cannot see it. Now, if you have been listening closely, you have realized these 3 killers do not travel alone, they travel together. And that brings me to the part of this I most need you to hear, because if you already own a boat, this next stretch is aimed straight at you. If you bought a used cruiser in the last few years, and you have a knot in your stomach right now wondering what you missed, I want you to stay with me, because you can run every one of these checks this weekend without paying a broker or a surveyor a single dollar. This is exactly what I would do if I were standing on your boat today. Start with a coin and 1 hour. Take a quarter and tap your way across the entire deck, section by section, the way I described. Mark every dead-sounding spot with a piece of blue tape. What you are building is a map of your own core. If you find 3 or 4 flat spots clustered around a fitting, you have an early leak, not a catastrophe, and catching it now might cost you a few $100s in rebedding instead of tens of thousands in recoring later. Next, go find your rigging date. If you have no paperwork and no memory of it being done, get on your back under the turnbuckles and photograph every lower terminal. Send those photos to a local rigger and ask for an opinion. Most will give you a rough read for free because they want the eventual job. If your rig is over 15 years old, start saving now, before insurance renewal forces the issue on someone else's timeline. Then, open every locker and press your fingers into the fiberglass around each chain plate and each through bolt. You are feeling for softness, for weeping rust, For the slightly damp smell of trapped water, get a cheap moisture meter, the kind that costs $30 to $50 online, and run it across your cabin sole and the base of your bulkheads. A bulkhead that reads wet at the bottom is a bulkhead detaching from the hull, and that is a structural problem you want to know about before your next offshore passage, not during it. And check your keel bolts. Lift the floorboards, find the big nuts and washers where the keel bolts come through into the bilge, and look for orange rust bleeding out from under the washers or streaks running down the keel stub. Surface rust is normal. Heavy weeping, or a gap where the keel meets the hull, is the keel smile I told you about earlier, and it means the boat has been driven hard aground or the bolts are corroding. That is a haul out and a serious conversation with a surveyor. None of this requires a broker. None of it requires trust. It requires a quarter, a flashlight, a cheap meter, and one honest afternoon. Do it, and you will know more about your own boat than most owners learn in a decade. But it also raises the darker question, the one that ties this whole case together. If these defects are so common and so findable, why is the entire market built to hide them from you? Therefore, let me show you who profits from your blind spot. Here is what took me a long time to understand. The stale listing, the consignment game, the vague just a little gel coat reassurance, none of it is an accident. It is a system, and the system is designed so that the cost of these three killers lands on the buyer instead of the seller. Every player in the chain has a reason to keep you looking at the teak and the sunset photos instead of the swage fittings and the keel bolts. The broker profits from the transaction, not the truth, so he describes the boat in the language of a dream. The seller profits from your ignorance, because every defect you fail to find is a defect he does not have to discount. And the marketing that surrounds this entire lifestyle, the glossy photos of a couple with wine glasses at anchor, exists to keep your eyes up on the horizon and off the bilge. The dream is not just a feeling. It is a sales tool, and it is aimed at your savings. Understand this, and the stale lot transforms in front of your eyes. Those unsold boats are not failures of the market. They are the honest ones. They are the boats where the truth got out, where enough buyers did the homework that the price could no longer hide the repairs. The boat that sells fast at a premium is often the more dangerous purchase because it sold before anybody had time to find what was wrong. The slow-moving stock is the market telling the truth in the only language it has, which is time on the lot. So the real skill is not finding the boat nobody wants, it is reading why nobody wants it. A boat that sits because it is overpriced by a stubborn owner with a sound hull is an opportunity. A boat that sits because 3 surveyors found wet core and dead rigging is a trap wearing the same price tag. They look identical in the listing. They are opposites in your bank account, and now you can tell them apart. Which brings me to the single piece of evidence I promised you at the start. The one thing that will let you read a boat's real condition before you ever set foot on it, and it comes from a source almost no buyer thinks to check. Every documented vessel in the United States over 5 net tons has a history recorded with the Coast Guard's documentation system, and that record is public. Its abstract of title lists every owner, every mortgage, and every recorded lien going back through the boat's life. I use it on every serious prospect, and here is what it tells you that no broker ever will. A boat that has changed hands 4 times in 8 years is a boat that keeps disappointing people. Rapid ownership turnover is one of the loudest warning signs in the entire market, and it is sitting there in a federal record you can pull for a nominal fee. But there is a second layer, and this is the part that feels almost like cheating. The hull identification number, the 12-character code stamped into the transom, encodes the builder and the exact month and year of manufacture. Once you have that, you can cross-reference the model against owner forums and class associations where the real production history lives. And this is where the buried evidence surfaces, because certain model years are known, documented, cursed. Let me give you the anchor I promised. The balsa cord decks on a whole generation of Hunter and Catalina production boats from the late 1970s through the mid-1980s are notorious in the owner associations for deck saturation precisely because the builders bedded the hardware with a polysulfide that failed within a decade. That is not my opinion. That is decades of accumulated owner testimony sitting in forum archives, cataloged by hull, number, and year. The industry buried that pattern under lifestyle marketing. The owners who lived it preserved it, thread by thread, in communities you can read tonight for free. So here is the whole method, the thing that took me years of walking boatyards to assemble, handed to you in one sequence. Get the hull identification number from the listing photos, or by asking, decode the builder and the year. Pull the Coast Guard abstract of title and count the owners and check for liens. Then take that exact model and year into the owner forums and search for the known defects. By the time you drive to see the boat, you already know its era's weaknesses, its ownership history, and whether the price on that stale listing reflects a stubborn seller or a saturated hull. You walk onto that dock not as the 40th hopeful dreamer, but as the one man who did the forensic work first. That is the difference between buying a boat and buying a case you have already solved. Here is what I need you to feel as you close this. The boat that sits unsold on that lot is not your enemy, and it is not your bargain. It is a witness. It has been standing there telling the truth to everyone who knew how to listen, and until today you are being taught to hear only the dream. Now you can hear the evidence, and that changes which boat takes your savings and which one takes someone else's. You are not the kind of buyer who trusts a sunset photo and a smiling broker. You are the kind who opens the bilge, taps the deck, and pulls the paperwork before he risks a dime of what he worked his whole life to save. That instinct that made you click this is the same instinct that will keep you off the wrong boat. So tell me one thing in the comments, and be specific, because I read them and I answer them. What is the longest you have ever seen a single sailboat sit unsold on a brokerage lot, and did you ever find out why? Drop the model and the number of months if you can. I want to build a picture of the stalest stock out there with the people who actually saw it. And if you would rather investigate a boat than be sold one, this is your crew. We do the homework the marketing hopes you skip. Next time I am pulling apart a specific model that gets praised endlessly as the perfect first blue water cruiser, and I found something in its bulkhead construction that the fan clubs never mention. Stay with me for that one, because once you see it, you will never look at that boat the same way again. I hope that opened your eyes a little. This video gave you the overview, but there's a deeper version waiting inside my membership, The Honest Harbor, where I continue right where we left off. In there you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself, and you won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime. No risk at all.